Mhm.
Why do you say that, Father? You aren't afraid, are you?
No, but I respect some of the superstitions of others. Often they are founded in fact.
Broadcasting live from our Sanctum Sanctorum in bountiful Bakersfield, California. This is the Sixth Sense Society. I'm your host, Krista, here with our producer, Michael, and we are excited to have back on the show our good friend, Dan Moore. He is a member of the Fraternity of Hidden Light who's been studying Hermetic Kabbalah for most of his life, I would say. And he has a course that he teaches now that is based on all of his experiences and practices with it that he offers to students who are seeking the way. But what I like about it is it's really something for everyone. It's not, you don't necessarily have to be part of a mystery school to really use it and to help your life. But today he's coming on specifically to talk about the esoteric view of that really interesting card, the Hanged Man, which many people have a reaction to. But before we get started, Michael has a few announcements.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to our show. And we're very happy to see you, except my camera is frozen. So here's what it is. So anyway, we have our guest, Renee Starr, next week. And we are going to have a lot of fun with her, witchcraft practitioner. And then we'll be on hiatus for a month. And so a chance to sort out some of our software, hopefully. Get all the information on our website, sixthsensesociety.com, SAXTH, all spelled out while you're there. Buy us a coffee on Ko-Fi if you can afford to. But most importantly, click like and subscribe. Help us grow our base. And don't forget our new book, Tarot Alchemy, a Kabbalah-inspired approach to reading the cards, is now available on Amazon. Search under books, and you should find it easily. And thank you to those who've purchased it, and hope you guys are enjoying it. So since my camera's not working, I'm going to kick it back to you guys. So take it away, Krista and Dan.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Sorry about that. And welcome, Dan.
Greetings.
It's nice
That's
to have you
okay.
back.
Michael can always be a man of mystery, you know.
Yes, he is a bit. People are always wondering, what is he really doing? They like it when he's on the show. So before we get started, I did want to say that it's just a couple days before the equinox. So if you do celebrate the equinox, happy equinox to you too.
Going to be an important time.
Yes, it is. So let's start a little bit with some basics. I think it might be important to tell people what a system of correspondences that you work with primarily with your own, with all of the Trumps. Like, is it a Golden Dawn or a Paul Foster Case system? Because there are different correlations in some of the systems. So what is the main one that you sort of use?
Yeah, the basic one that I use is the way the cards are set out and the way the Golden Dawn had done with their correlation of the 22 trumps to the various paths as they are on what's the most popular form of the Tree of Life. And that comes from the Cordoveran school, or Cordovero, which actually that means the true heart in Spanish. But him, along with Isaac Luria, were two of the major Kabbalistic schools in the 15th and 16th centuries in Palestine, what was then considered Palestine. Anyway, that's what I do, and I have found some kind of circumstantial evidence to suggest that that particular way that the trumps are laid out with the paths actually has much more of an initiatory effect on you if you're climbing the tree from Malkut on the bottom and going backwards through the paths and the tarot keys to eventually achieve, the culmination of the great work. That being said, I will say that there are other ways in which those keys have been classically assigned to the paths on the Tree of Life, which are different but nonetheless suggestive. And I would hope people would begin to see these things as something in which one part blends into another part in the same way that we have are the colors of the rainbow. All of those colors are light, but they're kind of unique unto themselves, and they come together to give us, our medium through which we view things with these little peepers of ours.
I like that, our little peepers. And
Mm.
so with the hangman, in a previous shows, we've talked a bit about the three orders and sort of the overview of your correspondence course. And so let's say that we're working with the hangman. Where would a student be in that sort of system when they reach the hangman in terms of working with it esoterically?
The hangman you would find on the left-hand pillar of form, and it actually is a bridge path. By that, I mean it actually connects at the bottom to one of the adept grades in the second order, and it then connects to the first grade of the third order. So it forms a bridge, if you will, between those two. And in a way, if you look across at the cards, and I think there's 5 of them, are those paths, they kind of bespeak to more advanced mental, spiritual calisthenics and potentials that need to be developed for you to go from being an adept to actually becoming a master. Because the first grade of the third order, it's Bina, that would be a formula of 8-3, but the title for it is Master of the Temple. So here you've got the hanged man with his feet standing on the Master of the Temple, right? There's where you get this thing about being flipped around, and that is such a fascinating card because it's meant to show you that maybe how you have built your world or how you've been told the world is and how it works is not right. And you need to literally upend or turn around your whole point of view in order to perceive reality accurately.
That is a somewhat common view of the hangman in sort of, I would say, regular tarot books of sort of
Mhm.
upending your view of things, which I could see based on the symbolism. But when you go back to the history, the hangman's one of those weird cards that has a strange history in that it was once called the traitor because
Yeah.
that's how you were hanged if you were a traitor. And I did want to mention this because I don't know if you've ever come across or read the two essays by Comte de Millet and Court de Guébelin that started the whole sort of Egyptian connection and the Hebrew letters.
Yeah.
It was before Levi.
I'll have to confess, I would not, but I know who they are
Uh,
and they're well
well,
together.
well, one
Yeah.
reason you might not have is because no one has bothered to translate it until like 2000, and this one fellow did because no one had translated it from the French.
Mhm.
And what's really interesting and fairly amusing about the Hangman card is that he adamantly thinks, I think it's Court de Guébelin, thinks that it should be upright. And he wants to associate it with the 4 virtues. Now, I know that no one else, as far as I know, minds it being upside down, but it's actually quite amusing what he says, and he kind of insults the card maker. And that's why I like
Uh,
reading these books because you're like, wow, that's bizarre. so, but it seems to the imagery seems to be a little mysterious, and maybe that's why people try these different things around it.
yeah. The association with water is what led me to suggest this way of looking at the card, in that water has all of these qualities of being kind of like the cosmic creative substance. It's like the air, it's all around us, it penetrates us. It has to do with vibration and tides, and it has to do with emotion and feeling. And there's a very psychic kind of connection, like we were talking about the intuition earlier, with all of that. So when you come up, and my thing is, if you were to look upon your reflection in a relatively calm pool of water, you look upside down to yourself.
That's
And
true.
I says, there's the vital clue right there to see the interconnection between the hangman, different point of view, and the all pervading water in the sense of that great sea of Bina, in which the hangman essentially that's where his feet are.
That's true. It's on that same path of Bina And then are you also associating it with water because of the Hebrew letter?
Yes, that is a large part of it. The thing about mem and the letter just before lamed, that's like the L and the M in our alphabet. Since Hebrew is only 22 letters, I mean the final forms are something that came later, but basically it's 22 letters. And if you wanted to look for a middle letter, a lot of people will point to mem, but it's not mem, it's also lamed. It's lamed and mem. Interestingly enough, if you look into how they're esoterically put together, they're made of a vav and a kaf stuck together. If you take that valuation, guess what? It's 26,
Hmm.
the value of Yod He Vav He. It's the ultimate source of being and creativity in the whole process of manifestation. So for me, something from the inner school, I did not read this in the book, it was given to me directly, is that those two letters form something called uh, point of perfection,
Hmm.
our perfect balance, right there with those two. And that's a very interesting idea because of how mem is and what it has to do with. But literally, it means in Hebrew, it's an emblem of water. And specifically to the vibrations and the waves that take place on water.
Well, going back to that idea of the point of balance, obviously, when a student is working at that level, they're not at that kind of perfection level. So it's just the beginning of looking at that concept and trying to understand that concept?
Yeah, it's a part of the spectrum of levels of growth and development, states of consciousness that you can achieve. So in there, it says these two cards are the point of perfect balance. Well, what do they each mean and so forth? And one of them is the Hanged Man. The other one happens to be Lamet, and you have the whole thing about the hermit or Hermes or the adept or magician, the one who has mastered
Hmm.
all stuff.
Now, do you? I know some esoteric view of or some people in the esoteric view of the hangman, they see it as a connection to the whole mythology of the dying god because of the hanged man, the sacrifice, and can represent whether it's, the version of Osiris or Jesus. Do you think of it that way?
Only in the sense that it represents a cyclic process. And a cyclic process, you will have points of renewal and resurrection and whatnot. I mean, truly, if you think about our life path, there's all these cycles we go through because the moon and the sun and all the planets return to their original positions and then go on again. But it also has a progressive attitude towards. So in sense, it's like a helix.
Hmm.
Okay. Now think about this. We're attached to the sun, right? All these planets are attached to the sun, and the sun is moving through space. So if you visualize the sun moving through space, all these planets turning around it make a giant helix. I mean, it's true, literally,
Hmm. Yeah,
not just philosophical.
it's very true. So the other thing about the hangman that I find interesting is, again, we use a system similar to yours. Aleister Crowley is only slightly different from the Golden Dawn, and so the
Yeah.
hangman's on a very extreme path. It's
Mhm.
not connected into the center. There's some cards are just either on the extreme left or extreme right, and we feel that does make it more imbalanced compared to ones that connect to the middle pillar. So do you have any view about sort of the left-hand pillar, those cards like the chariots like that, the hangman, and then the other ones tend to connect in more?
Yeah, I see the thing as being an aspect of a spectrum or a totality. It's like there is one extreme, and you could call it the pillar of water, and there's the other extreme, the pillar of fire. One in the middle is unique because it bespeaks of harmonic integration. A place, like again, those two cards, a place of perfect balance.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is true. I mean, if I can go back to the astronomy example, we live on this nice, beautiful Earth of ours, right? And all the people who've been in space, they kind of see that when they look off to the edge of the planet as they're orbiting, and then can see this thin little blue line, right? That's the atmosphere that surrounds us. It's all we know that we're born into, unless you go traveling in space. But here's the idea. In one extreme, it is complete vacuum. It's completely cold, right? In the other extreme, inside the Earth, what is it? Crushing pressure, extreme heat. Those two opposites. But at the point, little tiny, relatively speaking, it's thinner than the shell of an egg, relatively speaking, is that point of perfect balance where we not just live, but we thrive.
Hmm.
And you can see this idea, and this all goes back to the whole thing about yin and yang. That's the way I kind of see the three pillars.
Hmm.
They kind of break that aspect down a little bit more.
And so for you, the left pillar, what is that? Is it a feminine pillar, a masculine?
Yes. It's feminine, it represents form, and it represents the future, interestingly enough, in context of time flow. And then the other one, of course, is force or fire, and it is masculine, and it represents the past.
Yeah, we have it switched. Michael and I see the left as the past and the right as the future. And I suppose it can work either way if that's what you believe, because it does seem to work for us over the years. And I don't know, we have our own interpretation, but we agree with the feminine aspect, and the masculine is the right.
You know why we look at things that way? It's because English is read what? Left to right. Hebrew is right to left. So you start on the right, that's the past, and you're going towards the future as you read. That's the same. They did that because that's the way the moon filled out to become completely full.
Right.
That all follows the moon, and that's why they wrote that way and put the language like this. I mean, there's a lot of fascinating insight to why our ancestors did what they did when you begin to look at their perspective within the natural world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like I say, it probably works both ways, because we've definitely used it and it worked. And maybe it has to do with the fact that I read the other way, and it's one of those interesting things about working with any system. There's not a right or wrong way, but you do want to try it out and see if it actually experientially works. You know, as we learned very early on, the things that really just didn't hold up at all over time, that they were just ridiculously wrong, like all swords are evil. That was ridiculously wrong from the very beginning. You know,
You have to be a pragmatist. It's true if it works. Okay. And that's what pragmatism is boiled down to its basics. You have to be a pragmatist, and different kinds of things will work in different ways. But this is one thing that was kind of interesting. The people who are in science of mind, I think you've heard about that. Uh, they have an interesting idea. They said, God never says no to you. And you should sit back and think about that one. That's a weighty statement in a lot of different ways. You know?
what do you think that means? That is interesting.
Well, it means that everybody's going to go over Fool's Hill, and you're going to do things that maybe you shouldn't have done and whatnot. But God says, okay, go ahead, do this. See what you learn from it. That's what it is.
Mm.
There you've got the fool just about to drop off the precipice.
Mm.
And that's what it is.
I have a funny story about the fool. I have one of them too. The hangman. I was reading at a party, and I used the Thoth deck, and in the Thoth deck, the hangman is completely naked. And I was reading, a woman sits down, a very attractive African-American woman, maybe in her mid-30s. She looked at that card, she picked it, and she said, "Who is that naked man?" And she immediately liked it. And I think that's the only time I have ever heard anyone say that. And we personally associate the left-hand path with the path of the healer. And the hangman can represent going through some kind of healing and releasing. And she ended up being a masseuse. I just found it fascinating that to her, immediately, she recognized something, because it was just, I've never had anyone do that since. Most people are like, oh my God, it's the hangman.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so I found that really kind of
A
curious.
negative. Yeah. And she was much more open, and she was open in a way that I think Frado Perturabo or Aleister Crowley did this because, he was kind of reeling against all of this incredible prudishness of the Victorian era.
Right.
So I made that deck, and I can see where it touched the sensuous parts of her life in a much more positive way
Yeah.
than I was, oh no, it's bad, and he's naked too, kind of thing.
Yeah, it
Anyway,
really makes him stand out even more when he's naked there. It's like, whoa, you can't miss him.
and it drives the point home a little bit.
It definitely does. And I mean, I mean, the top deck is just such a beautifully drawn and painted deck by Lady Frida Harris. I love it. But it was just so amusing. And when you teach the course and by the time a person gets to working with the hangman, are there things that have happened to the students, indications that they
Mhm.
kind of got the lessons before that, and what would they be since, again, the hangman's not at the beginning of the journey?
Yeah, yes, I will have to say this, that one thing I insist upon, I'm dogmatic about, is that you go through this journey on the tree of life and through the letters and the cards and whatnot in this sequence that it is laid out. You don't skip around. You do this all the way from the beginning to the end of it because uh, the way the paths are put together and the little minor structures they build, like when you get to the first triangle on the tree of life at the bottom, which is basically Malkut, the kingdom, Yesod foundation, and Hod, which is um, splendor, I think. Anyway,
Yeah.
that 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 there, and you take a look at all the what correlates with it and whatnot, and it's actually an alchemical triangle. It puts out all the major motifs or symbolic motifs of alchemy.
Mm.
So the thing is, I think that there is this way of climbing up the tree of life. And I say you got to do it the first time because the first time is the first impression. It's the most important. And there are going to be subtle little things that are going to happen. You might not notice them, but they will happen.
Mm.
And I said, then after that, you can read it in any sequence you want to. That doesn't matter. But the first time is very important to go through it like that. So we're talking about getting to a point to where we want to look at these names that they call these various um, organisms, shall we say, and we call it an order, right? So first or outer order of the lesser mysteries, and that has to do with what's out there. That the world is kind of interesting, but there's also a world here within me. How do these things interrelate? Which is the natural progression into what? The inner order of the greater mysteries coming inside. And then the last one is truly that's the invisible order
Mm.
because it represents the metaphoric capstone or the dome of the edifice of creation. That is the source of all mystery traditions, ancient, modern, and yet to be. They come from that.
It seems too, though, from what I know about the ancient orders or people even practicing in the 1800s or the 1900s, they spent a lot more time on the inner order than perhaps modern people do. Not all modern people, but it seems perhaps, I'm not going to say that's true of sort of religious orders because they still have their systems. But with the Western esoteric people, there's so much available so easily. And there's so much outer expression about things that I don't know if people are going to be giving things enough time for the inner order to really develop. And we also have a lot of course, distractions.
Well, that's also why you don't actually get this thing in one lifetime. It's a journey, and it's a very long, drawn out journey. And the journey is typically represented by the zodiac, because these are the 12 major personality types that we will all experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that takes a long time.
It does. It's I don't know. It's kind of sad to me. It seems like things are speeding up so much, and there's still too many people are going with that pace instead of countering it by slowing down. And
Mhm.
I mean, I know you can't go backwards into a world where we don't have, social media and things like that, but you can definitely step away from it, and you can take the time to do something on a daily basis. Most people that are involved in these, esoteric development courses or on their own. And it seems like on some level we have so much available, but do we have the patience to do the inner work?
Well, eventually you can't beat out eternity, and that's why it takes more than one lifetime.
Yeah, no,
The
that's
thing
true.
is, I think that, you have to realize who and what you are as a human being and begin to see a more of a continuity between your experiences when you were a child and then as you grow up and mature and anything in between that are your experiences. And that's why I tell people, you have these paranormal experiences, whatever they are, how weird or strange, that's your truth. They're my truth too. I've had these things because I know, and frankly, I don't have to prove it to anybody. I don't care. It was for
Hmm.
me. And everybody has these along with their life path that peel back a little bit more of the veil or spread it a little wider, however you want to use the metaphor for that. That you eventually realize this, and that's the thing where the hanged man now stands on the source. It's like, we see the earth as the source and gravity, and we're standing on it. That's the source. He stands on that. And from there, everything else comes. He's on that scaffolding that maybe looks like one Hebrew letter and maybe another, and maybe a combination of both. He's in the more classical ones, he's kind of set with his hands behind his head right, and the way his legs are. He actually makes a sulfur symbol.
Right.
He's trying down below and that up above. And that's a symbol of the soul. So these are important things, little subtle hints to take a look at about that. But the way I went about it in my lessons anyway was to talk about contemplating yourself by looking at your image in a pool of water. And
Well,
there really is the essence of the hanged man for me.
going back to that idea that it's a symbol of the soul, which is interesting. There are different beliefs that the soul doesn't, you have to give birth to the soul. Like there's different religions that say, oh, there's like two births in a lifetime. That's where the soul, I know there's kind of a Eastern one I've come across. Um, and that idea though, we have a soul, but there's this other process that needs to happen so that it's like a second birth. So what is your view about a person's soul in, say, this lifetime? Is it just there no matter what? Do you also think there's some sort of a birth process like some traditions do?
Well, I would have to say that the soul itself represents your experiences, whatever they may be on the outside, on the inside, in the in-between state between being born and dying, you know. That's what the soul is. It represents a sort of interconnection. And there's some great stuff on YouTube. Anyway, there's a fellow who's into martial arts, and he says, when we look at it here, this is form. The body's very obvious, right? And then there's the mind, but the mind has no form. It's not obvious. It's invisible. It's unseen. What connects the two? And he says, it's your breath. Okay. And as you breathe in different ways and whatnot, your body will react differently and your mind will experience things differently. Curiously enough, okay, where Tiferet is, which is the heart in the human being, is also where they put the Vav of Yod He Vav He. And Vav is the conjunctive in Hebrew. It's the same as our an. It's called a nail. So what that basically says is that we are meant, ultimately our destiny is to be a universal connector between everything that we would might describe as below to all that's above, or everything that's within, which is more relevant to everything which is without.
Hmm.
And this we have a talent for. It's our destiny. We could do it. Why is it that all these words for soul in Greek and in Hebrew represent breath or air? Isn't that an interesting interconnection, you know?
Yeah. Absolutely. It seems then that everyone has a soul.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Then how is it that some people seem so soulless?
Because this is to use Isaac Luria's thing. This is what he called the cliffot or cliffa, and that means a husk or a shell. So that everything, in order for it just to be, has to be a divine holy spark, and these sparks are part of the life force. But that spark of light, that brilliance that we all are, everything is, and it doesn't. It's not just confined to people, can become covered over, and it can become dimmed. It can become encrusted. So in a way, part of our process is to open that up and let the light that's inside shine out. And the interesting thing about that, if you want a connection, I think there is at least circumstantial evidence that this idea of this encrusting also has to do with the idea of an onion. And onions were revered and worshipped in ancient Egypt. People took oaths on an onion. Why? Because it's that nice round ball. We talk about pulling back the layers of the onion, right? Those are the coverings. When you go through this process, we all go through it to reveal what's inside.
Hmm.
You're your own redeemer, you know. Once you realize that, and yeah, there are people that are soulless. I mean, they just think this is it, and that's it. The one with the most toys wins, right?
Right.
You know, completely taken with the form and the illusion of the form.
Now, another interesting image on at least the weight deck is the halo around the head of the hanged man. And so, how would you interpret that yourself?
A suggestion of enlightenment. Supposedly, there's a physical origin, kinda, that when the Kundalini actually comes into the brain, that there is this kind of bowl or glowing golden glow that comes up around the head like this. And that's where we get the circle of gold and nimbus and a halo. Supposedly it's like that. But basically, because the head is glowing, it's enlightened. It's, I just take the symbolism at its face value. Whether or not there was a historical origin like that, I think there might have been, but so what? Doesn't matter. The idea is it's talking about your enlightenment. And you have alchemical, wonderful alchemical stuff that shows someone being cut up, and the person doing the cutting up had their head, but their head was gold. The rest of it looked like a regular body.
Hmm. So, the head is ruled by Aries. And so it's an interesting, you could probably also say that it could symbolize something about letting go of sort of uh, the false self or the me, because and maybe there's some other version
Or we
of
get,
that.
get words like rampage, right? Yeah. Hey, there's something to that.
We're
I
going to
can't
have a
remember
lot of Aries this year. We got lots of Aries coming in with Neptune's going to be in Aries and Saturn in Aries. And so it's going to be a world on fire in a lot of ways. And
the.
Aries is definitely one of those zodiac signs that deserves some of its reputation, but it can also be really demonized a little bit.
Yeah, it's the light side of Mars, where Scorpio is the dark side. Um, the other thing about that, you think of it, the ram, but it's also what? It's sheep. It's a lamb. The Angus D,
Mm,
the
yeah.
Lamb of God.
And it's interesting because the hangman, of course, connects to the fives, which is connected to Mars, the planet Mars, at least in Crowley's version of it all. And so there's all these intricate connections I find. Now, one of the things I did want to ask you is I forget who it is that thinks that the hangman is connected to Neptune. I've kind of adopted that view sometimes, the planet Neptune.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just that since the tree sits very nicely into the classical seven planets, with the fixed stars being part of that, and then existence itself. Uh, there was this need to, as we discovered other planets, to kind of stick them in their chronological climbing towards the crown, I think. For me, I've been trying to learn so much about the seven rays of the planets, because that's the Elohim, and that was the word that talks about creation. It says God, it's actually Elohim, and it's plural. So it's talking about gods. And in a sense, since it's well, they represent both sexes, but the singular of it's feminine. So you could almost say, in one respect, also represents goddesses. But to the tradition, they're exactly seven, and they exactly match all of our, what we like to call chakras, or in alchemy, we call them the interior metals or interior stars. So I have been kind of focusing on that as seeing the outer planets like Neptune and Pluto and so forth as being these kinds of centers they talk about that's up here and up here, above
Right.
your head. I've got to figure out this part first, and then I'll look at that because their orbits are so long around the sun, and we do not have a population yet that ages out to what it takes. I think what's the next one? Isn't Neptune about 129 years in its
Yeah,
orbit?
it's too long.
We
Yeah,
don't
I
have
think
people
I think
using.
Uranus is the last planet that you can age out into because it's 84 years to get to your Uranian return in astrology. Yeah, it's I totally get that, and I know there's some people that even do astrology charts like that do not take into consideration. I think that it's fine. I think that, however, one of the things about going deep with something and having a system is it's going to give you what you need to find in a sense. And I think that when it is a system, like it's a legitimate system, instead of someone that just kind of makes things up and throws things around and say, okay, this is a system. And I could see that that could be very useful. I do like, I have studied the Hangman in connection to Neptune, and there are definitely some connections I find with it. That kind of mysterious element to the Hangman. I mean, the mystery of the Hangman is just the imagery itself. It definitely has a mysterious aura about it. But
Yeah.
there's no one way to view things. I was just kind of curious whether you did
The
or
name of
not
the
view it
planet
that way.
that is suggestive, right? Neptune, king of the sea.
Yeah, it's connected to the sea. According to Liz
Oh,
Green, I think that she thinks it should have been named after a female deity in her book on Neptune, which is kind of the tomb for Neptune. If you want to read an astrological, it's so huge too. But that whole oceanic thing is, and how Neptune is so spiritual and also delusional. That side of Neptune as well.
Yeah.
So. Another
That's
thing I did want to bring up is I wanted to ask you about, you had sent me, the copy of the Hangman from your course, and you had the quote from the Book of Tokens, and which is, I find it very, I think it's difficult to read that. I've tried reading it, and in the sense that it is very poetic and symbolic, and so why do you include that, and what is your take on Paul Foster Case's meditation on that, a hangman?
Well, for me, the stuff was very inspirational. I think I first read Book of Tokens, around probably around 50 years ago. I don't know, I think about it. And the thing that initially grabbed onto me is this emphasis of everything being one and united and interconnected and so forth. And the other symbolism in the way he used it with the gematria and Kabbalistic symbology, along with a few other Hermetic metaphors thrown in, was intriguing to me, and I resonated with that. So I kind of put that in there because you see Eliphas Levi's, the redrawing of it that Augustus Knapp did, shows the same idea that I suggest in the very beginning of the lesson, right? Looking over a pool of water in your own reflection. There it is in some of the most advanced aspects of the philosophy and the discipline.
Yeah, so that was the line. Let's see if I have it right here. He says, let's see, I guess I'd have to read the whole thing. Yeah, he talks about the womb of all beings, and Mem is the murmuring of this great sea of life. And he does have that sort of, there it is, the dark mirror of substance. I am the water of life, the mute dark mirror of substance, which you were talking about, form. And I guess I like that idea on one level, but because we live in a very narcissistic age, I sort of don't like that idea of the, seeing yourself reflected reverse, because it seems to also be connected to the myth of narcissism.
Well, if you fall in love with the form, sure it does. But that's why when in classical Judaic Kabbalah, they talk about this stuff being, you have the kind of homiletic aspect of all the stories in the Bible. They're teaching lessons about morality and ethics and whatnot. And they say that's kind of like the clothes, okay? And then when you get into the philosophical aspect of it, that's like really studying the body that's covered up by the clothes and the anatomy and so forth. And then when you finally get to Kabbalah, it's actually called the soul of the law. The secret, or sod is the word they use. So we get yes sod. Yes sod actually means look at Yod, and that's the secret of it. That's what the foundation is.
Hmm.
The secret of it.
Hmm.
So now you got to go look that up in your tarot, and so forth. But I mean, all these things come together and make a vast, wonderful picture. And there are aspects of that picture, the way it's made and put together, that are very similar with other traditions from different locations from around the world. There's a lot of interconnection with Orientalism.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Now, in the Tree of Life, the system that we both use, on the opposite side, on the other path, on the far right, is the wheel. So do you have any kind of thoughts? Do that we see a sort of correlation between them, and being that they're on the same position but they're just on the opposite side? Do you have any ideas or thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think that's where there's one of the changes, because the Wheel of Fortune usually is connecting uh, Chesed number 4 to Netzach, victory number 7, or number 4. No, it's number 7. That is. So you have that up there. But the basic thing about the Wheel of Fortune, as it's called, Fortune's Wheel, is the fact that when I got a copy of the Golden Dawn deck, at least as the Stella Matutina had gotten the designs, it was very revealing to me to see that they had actually put 12 spokes on there, and the colors were suggestive of them being interrelated to the signs of the zodiac.
Hmm.
So that the Wheel of Fortune is the thing that we all go through in life. And in some of these cards, it's actually shown floating on a sea,
Hmm.
isn't it?
Oh, that's interesting.
So,
Oh, I didn't know that the wheel is seen as floating on a sea in some decks.
mhm.
Oh, I don't think I remember that for some reason.
Yeah, that's something you have to look down. It's like these are little subtle hints here and there. Look, there's by this, or there's a waterfall over here. When it's just a little feature off to the side, but those little features off to the side, are you paying attention? There are all these little subtle things that actually matter, and they will make connections for you when you're ready for it. Case just used the term right, when you were ripe for this experience.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I've noticed that, you'll be drawn to something in a card that you never noticed before. Absolutely. And it's so standing out there. You're like, how did I miss that?
Or somebody else's artistic interpretation. That's for me, tarot. Another aspect of it is like art. And I don't have that many decks, but I would like to collect them as art. So when one kind of touches me because of the way the art was done or whatnot, or the symbolism used, I wind up buying it. It's
Well,
like that
it's a huge part of
Bruce.
tarot is it's art. I mean, they were hand painted for royalty originally, and it's also, because tarot is also a game. You could have any kind of deck if you wanted to play the game of tarot. But I know we've talked about this before. There's a lot of people that just don't remotely care about any of the symbolism in the lineage of the tarot, and they just make things up. And the decks aren't even remotely connected to any of the symbolism, any of the skulls. And I personally, I see them just as like oracle decks then. They're, which could be fine. Oracle decks could be very,
Yeah.
maybe they have beautiful art, but I think that you can certainly innovate the design and do things like that. But it's it's a money making thing now. It's a huge money making thing, actually.
Unfortunately, it can be.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? The way to look at that for me is that the older design tends to tap into not just cultures, but history too. So there are a lot of common things we as human beings experience. We just all do. And it's kind of like my wonderful wife, Jan, said, look at us, a face, it's got certain things, 2 ears, 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, but we all look different. And that's the idea. There are these similarities, but then that goes into the continuity. That's why when we talk about second order, then they start talking about something called the individuality, a very unique technical term that I haven't really seen in classical Kabbalah, but I certainly have seen it in Hermetic writings.
Hmm.
And that's the idea that the way I kind of look at it, the picture that was presented to me was of this enormous diamond or crystal, and it has all these facets on it. And there is light going into it, and you and I are the facets, but we take that same light, well, we bend it in a certain way, and maybe we cause some colors to uh, flow around the edge in chromatic aberration. But it's all unique to our own little facet
Mm.
of that jewel.
Yeah, it makes it's kind of a fractal view of things.
Yeah, so that's our individuality, and then there is only one true self of all beings. That's why they can't describe it any more than like a samadhi or the atma, or in actually the old language it would have been called the ani, which is Hebrew for I myself.
Now, there was something interesting I thought you said in your course uh, blurb, I guess, about the hangman that you sent me. And you were talking about how practical this key is. And you said that this guidance is intensely practical. It is applied to the business of living in the world. And there was, a quote before that. But just that idea of the hangman and what you are doing with it or learning from it has this really strong practical side really surprised me. So would you elaborate on that?
I guess the point is the practical, and maybe I should, I'm a little bit like that. It's kind of like practical occult work. In other words, you are open enough to the winds that are blowing on the inside, the alignment of the stars, the current sea of vibrations in the human race mind and whatnot, that you know what's going on and where you need to be and what you need to be doing. So in that sense, it's very practical. Now we get little flashes of that, I think, kind of in the time where you meet someone that's very significant, or you come across a book or a deck that's very significant, or it can be as simple as, and for me, because I have to use a walker, I want a shopping cart to be next to the handicap. So that kind of thing. And but everybody, I'm sure, has had the experience of being at just the right place at just the right time. Well, that's very unique because now we're getting into the mysteries of time itself and manifestation and the whole flow of it.
Mm.
That's where you're going. This is what you're, William, that I like the idea of biological metaphors. So in a sense, this idea of the grand universal human, the Adam Kadmon, is actually that we live in a super organism.
Mm.
And that superorganism is Adam Kadmon, as the ancients understood it.
Mm.
We're all part and parcel of that.
So going back to just the hangman and the key, when somebody is working with that, is there any sort of, I suppose, negative side effects of people? Like, do they get stuck in some aspect of it or confused by it? Or is there a sort of shadow side that would have to be dealt with when working with the hangman, mostly from your experience of working with people?
Well, I think it depends upon the person's development and their acumen, where they're at. Assessing someone where they're at spiritually, whether or not they should undertake your school of work or your path or whatnot, is quite an art. And it takes a little bit to figure that one out and to be able to read a person. As far as dark aspects go, I think that's something we all have to deal with because we all have our dark aspects. In the GD tradition or this Hermetic tradition, you come to the dweller on the threshold, which is your dark self, your dark twin, the the limitations and the fears and guilt, whatever else, and all these negative kind of emotions and experiences that generate them, we all have to deal with. And in that sense, I think that's a large part of what is already meant by this being a kind of advanced form of psychology.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely advanced. As much as I really appreciate what I've gained from reading psychology, and I've only gone to maybe a few therapists, but I love a lot of the Jungian ideas. But I still find that there's some real limitations they have, particularly around psychic phenomena, that kind of baffles me a little bit because there's so much evidence of certain things throughout many cultures, including psychic information through dreams. It's so predominant. It's been going on for centuries, and they kind of want to dismiss that a little bit. That even the people I really like have done that. It's still, everything's still a symbol of yourself kind of thing. And I thought, well, no, actually, I've had psychic dreams, and
Uh,
so, and I'm not alone. So,
yeah. The thing is that it does affect the outside, and it depends upon your philosophy, what you decide is reality. Because I mean, you can philosophically take up the point of view that I'm the only being that's real, and all the rest of you are dreams or the figments of my imagination and so forth.
yeah.
Okay. And philosophy can lead you to doubt yourself and all existence too. I like Descartes' argument about that. I think, therefore I am. Cogito ergo sum. In other words, I have cognition, and cognition is the sum of being.
Hmm.
So he's saying essentially everything is mind with that Latin statement. And that's the point, where we come to how do we differentiate between what we might call matter, and we have all these definitions of it because we've taken it all apart, right? Um, to our experiences of touching it and moving through it and how the ancients looked at it, there is quite a bit of things to think about. I'll give you an example. If we return to this idea of connecting the form with the unseen, your mind, the body with the mind, through the breath, well, think on this. We are dwelling around in this ocean of atmosphere. It surrounds us in all directions. It's completely invisible, yet we can feel it. In some cases, we can kind of like touch it. It can directly intrude into our lives. And if we don't have it for a certain period of time, we are no more.
Mm, absolutely.
So that's something to think about, being interconnected through the invisible air. I mean, you're breathing in what someone else breathed out, what the trees breathed out, what evaporated off the surface of the ocean or a lake.
Mm. So when you work with someone as a student, do you have any method that you use to give feedback? So I don't know that you do this. This is a little more arduous. But I know that there are some schools that have people keep magical diaries, and they only show that diary to the person that's their mentor, which I think is phenomenal. I mean, but that's a lot of work. So, but do you have anything that sort of is a feedback mechanism?
Other than it's not really a feedback mechanism. What it is because this stuff is abstract, but yet intensely personal. I wanted to come up with ways that allow someone to kind of wrap their conceptual hands around these ideas and the experiences, and to see what experiences they've had and so forth. And that is the way that we kind of build this bridge to the ultimate realization. So I don't have a feedback per se, but then I started saying, because I had a hard time doing, a magical journal too. But then there came times where there were ideas that were so clear and so powerful and whatnot, I had to write them down. I couldn't help that. And that became the basis of my magical diary. And the suggestion is, and I accept it, that's how all of our traditions came about. You know,
Right.
after generations, after hundreds and thousands of years of keeping records and doing stuff.
It does help, even if it's intermittent, to write things down that happen to you spiritually or magically. I mean, one obvious thing is you do forget, even if you think you're going to remember. It's especially after an experience, it's very much like a dream that fades, or you start not trusting it. Like, did that really happen? So yeah,
Mhm.
and it's very useful to do that. I didn't even know it was a tradition until maybe about 7 years ago. I hadn't heard about the magical diary. I came across it somewhere, but I thought it was brilliant, and I think it's a great idea, even if you can't do it all the time. If that, like you said, you just feel compelled, like, oh, this one I really have to write down.
Yeah, and see, for these kinds of things, because you have to write an everyday drudgery, blah, blah, blah. I don't like that. That does not inspire one's creativity. And your creativity is a divine thing. That's your muse. Um, so I like to say, well, you have ideas, you write them down, or something you experience, and that's going to be your magical diary. And don't worry about writing it every day. That's not the point.
I would say there's definitely two sides to that coin, because I have done things rigorously before. And even though it was really annoying, like I went through this period where I put a card, one of Aleister Crowley's cards, under my pillow at night, and I
Oh, yeah.
kept it there for a week, and I recorded the dreams. And let me tell you, I did not want to record some of them. I still haven't really done a lot with what I got, but I started getting some really interesting things that I don't even understand, actually. And I was like, okay. So it was kind of hard, because I did it for a year, I think, and I don't know that I could do that every day, but I think taking short periods where you make yourself, you find you
Mhm.
do go deeper with it, and so that maybe doing a little both, sometimes discipline, like, okay, this month I'm going to do it every day because I'm doing this ritual and I really want to see. So for me, I had an objective why I wanted to do it every day. But I agree with you. It can be stifling, so I don't always do that. I think that there can be times it's helpful.
Mm-hmm. Those times is helpful. And I just use the general metaphor, say, look, you're climbing the mountain of spiritual attainment. When you hear about Zion, Mount Zion, it's actually Zion, doesn't even spelled with a Zayin or a Z. Uh, it means goal. And what it is, it's the apex of the spiritual mountain, of which there are many ways to get to the top of that. And it is a long, arduous journey climbing up that mountain. Well, there's no way around it. It's
That
like
is true.
climbing a mountain.
That is an
So
understatement.
once you finally get there and you can see the light and then you can shine it down for everybody else who's struggling up there, that's the whole wonderful symbolism of the hermit,
Mm,
with his lamp of the hidden knowledge
hmm.
guiding us on the way.
Yeah, the hermit's a great image, and we'll have you talk about that another time. Wasn't he one time called the hourglass? I think that was one of the names of the early hermit card. It was an hourglass, which I find interesting too. I mean, to me, they're all good. The lantern, the hourglass, but it's one of those cards too that has kind of.
Yeah, it might have been something more like what could have been like lodge ritual equipment or appointments, you know, that they had an hourglass. And I have an hourglass. I think there's a lot of magical uses for the thing, kind of like having a scrying mirror, a black mirror.
Sure, the hourglass is a really wonderful tool. And so I know we're getting close to the end, and I just wanted to give a shout out to your course, and they would just contact you directly if they're interested in taking the whole course.
Yeah, they can contact me directly. So you get a little taste of what you're buying. I'm always in for that. I'll send you the first lesson for free.
And we always have your email address on our website.
I noticed that sometimes some people kind of found it hard for some reason, but I don't know. I found it on there. So if I can find it, gosh darn it, everybody else should be able to too.
Yes. Well,
Yes,
they can
write
always
me.
contact us too, and we'll let them know. But thank you, Dan, for coming on. As always, it was very enlightening and fun.
I enjoyed being in. It's wonderful to compare all of these experiences. I hope there's many people in the audience who resonate with these ideas and feelings.
And thank you all for listening in. Join us next time as we continue to explore the esoteric and the obscure together, and enjoy the equinox.